Breaking news. The Las Vegas Raiders might have just uncovered a hidden gem, and fans everywhere are starting to take notice. A young defensive lineman flashed serious potential in his first extended action, and the numbers back it up. But that's not all. We've also got strong words from Chris Sims about one of the most talked about running back prospects. Stick with me, because this one is going to get intense. Before we dive into the latest headlines, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss breaking NFL updates. Now let's get into the news. The Las Vegas Raiders may have pulled off a steal with defensive lineman Thomas Booker. For the first time, Booker played a meaningful role, logging 44 total snaps, and he made every one count. Here's the breakdown. 30 snaps rushing the passer, 14 against the run, and in that time, he generated 5 total pressures, including 1 quarterback hit and 4 hurries. That's not just stat padding. That's real impact on the field. What stood out most wasn't just the numbers, but his explosiveness off the snap. The speed and movement he showed gave offensive linemen fits. In one particular play, Booker fired out so quickly that the right tackle barely had time to react. Within seconds, Booker was already in the quarterback space. The ball came out fast, but the pressure was undeniable, and that's exactly what coaches want to see from a developing pass rusher. Booker's quickness, agility, and raw motor are what made him intriguing when the Raiders first acquired him, and now he's starting to show flashes of why he could become a long-term piece of this defense. Against teams that rely heavily on the quick passing game, like Josh McDaniels' offenses, it's notoriously difficult to get sacks. Yet Booker still managed to leave his mark, showing he's got the tools to disrupt even the fastest-moving plays. What makes Thomas Booker so intriguing is how his skill set matches up against different offensive styles. Against quick-game teams like the Patriots, it's tough to pile up sacks because the ball comes out so fast. But when you face a team like the Chiefs, who love to attack 30 or 40 yards downfield, or a creative play caller like Ben Johnson with the Bears, Booker's explosiveness suddenly becomes a huge advantage. That's when he has the chance to actually finish plays and get home. On tape, the quickness jumps out immediately. In one outside zone run, Booker shot into the backside gap so fast you'd think he took a head start. Normally, when a defensive tackle does that, they take themselves out of the play. Not Booker. He blew it up, shutting down the run before it even had a chance. That kind of instinct and burst is rare. Now, is he polished yet? Not really. You won't see him chaining together advanced pass rush moves like a veteran. No swim, swipe, or spin just yet. But his first step is deadly. That quick get-off allows him to win with pure speed or drive linemen backwards with a powerful bull rush. Even against the Patriots' all-pro right guard, Booker showed he could hold his own. On multiple snaps, he drove him into the pocket, creating enough chaos to rattle the quarterback. And let's not forget the Isaiah Pola-Mao interception. Maxx Crosby might have gotten the hit, but it was Booker who executed the line stun alongside him, forcing the play to collapse from both sides. These are the kinds of moments casual fans overlook, but coaches and scouts don't miss them. Booker's movement, his ability to slant one way, redirect, and still pressure the quarterback. That's the mark of a defender with serious upside. One play in particular really showed how Thomas Booker can change a drive. The Patriots tried to run a trap concept, pulling the tight end up to block Devin White. But Booker completely disrupted the plan. He beat the center off the snap so quickly that the tight end had no choice but to pick him up instead of climbing to the linebacker. That left White untouched, and he blew the play up in the backfield. That's the kind of chain reaction you want from an interior defender. Even if he doesn't make the tackle, his presence creates opportunities for his teammates. But here's the thing. For Booker to become more than just a disruptive athlete, he's going to need to refine his pass-rushing toolbox. Right now, his biggest asset is that explosive first step, and it's deadly. What he doesn't have yet are the advanced moves, the swipes, swims, and hand counters that guys like Chris Jones or Jalen Carter use to consistently win against top-tier linemen. If Booker adds even one or two of those techniques to his arsenal, his ceiling skyrockets. We actually got a reminder of what that looks like in the same game. Adam Butler flashed a slick swim move over a Patriots lineman. Exactly the type of skill Booker still needs to develop. That's the next stage in his growth, learning to pair technique with his natural quickness. And beyond Booker himself, there's another big story here. The Raiders' defensive scheme looks noticeably different this season. In recent years, they leaned heavily on a rotation of 4 defensive ends, mixing Maxx Crosby, Malcolm Koonce, Tyree Wilson, and others. But against New England, we only saw 3 edge rushers consistently in the rotation. That's a major shift, and it suggests the coaching staff is leaning into a tighter core group. Expect Crosby, Kuntz, and Wilson to shoulder most of the load, with Booker and the interior rotation becoming even more important to keeping that front solid. When you look at the defensive tackle rotation, it's starting to feel much clearer. Adam Butler and Thomas Booker are emerging as the two main interior disruptors, while Jonah Laulu logged close to 30 snaps and looks poised for a steady role this season. Tonka Hemingway saw limited action with 11 snaps, and it wouldn't be a surprise if those eventually get split with Leki Fotu as the year moves along. What stands out most, though, is the Raiders' willingness to trim down the rotation. Instead of shuffling bodies in and out like they did in past seasons, this year it's about 3 core defensive ends and 3 core defensive tackles, a leaner, more focused approach. Now, the big question is whether Booker can grow into more than just a solid contributor. Could he actually develop into a star? The raw tools are there, and what he showed against New England gives a lot of people hope. But his future depends on consistency and how quickly he can refine those technical aspects of his game. Shifting to the offensive side, one storyline that's flown a little under the radar is the growing skepticism around rookie running back Ashton Gentry. Former quarterback and analyst Chris Sims didn't hold back in his evaluation. According to him, Gentry just doesn't look explosive enough to be a top 10 pick. He pointed out that while Gentry dominated against weaker college opponents, his production dipped noticeably when the competition stiffened. And in the NFL, every week is Penn State. Yes, Gentry managed 19 carries for 38 yards and found the end zone on a tough run where he refused to go down. But Sims argues that beyond that, there hasn't been much to get excited about. In his eyes, Gentry isn't running away from defenders, and he isn't flashing that second gear you expect from a feature back. That said, context matters. Defenses are already treating Gentry with respect, stacking the box, sending blitzes on early downs, and doing everything possible to slow him down. For a rookie, that's a heavy burden, and it explains some of the inefficiency we've seen. The talent is real, but the spotlight is even brighter, and how he responds over the next few weeks could shape his entire rookie narrative. Here's where things get tricky for Ashton Gentry. Defenses are stacking the box to shut him down, and while that limits his stats, it also opens up big plays for the Raiders' passing attack. In other words, he's helping the offense, but his personal numbers don't always reflect it. That's part of the reason analysts like Chris Sims have been quick to question his explosiveness. But let's be fair. When you watch the tape, Gentry isn't just stumbling around out there. He had several solid runs, gains of 9, 6, 5, and 4 yards, where his vision and burst were clear. The problem is what happened late in the game. The Raiders leaned heavily on the ground game once they built a lead, and the Patriots' front seven was waiting for it. His last handful of carries went nowhere, dragging his average down and making the box score look far worse than it really was. And some of those negative plays weren't on him at all. There were clear breakdowns in blocking, like one snap where a front-side defensive end was left completely unblocked while confusion unfolded on the interior. It looked like a missed assignment. Maybe the center or Dylan Parham was supposed to trap the linebacker, but instead, the play blew up for a 5-yard loss. On paper, that's a knock against Gentry. In reality, it's a protection mistake that left him with no chance. This is where the disconnect comes in. Critics see the raw numbers, 19 carries for 38 yards, and cry inefficiency. But if you actually watch the film, Gentry shows good vision, makes the right reads, and finds his lanes. On one play, he even slipped on the wet field with daylight ahead of him, a run that could have been a touchdown. Those are the details the stat sheet doesn't tell you. So yes, Gentry hasn't exploded out of the gate the way some expected, but writing him off this early misses the bigger picture. He's drawing attention, creating opportunities, and showing the instincts of a back who knows how to play the position. The production will come. It's just a matter of time and circumstance. One of the things that stood out most on tape was Ashton Gentry's vision. On a run designed to hit the A-gap, he quickly recognized it wasn't there and bounced the play outside, turning nothing into something. Those little flashes don't always show up in the stat sheet today, but they're the kind of instincts that could lead to a 75-yard touchdown tomorrow. That's why, even with a tough matchup looming against the Chargers, there's optimism. If you want to be a legitimate contender in this league, you have to prove you can run the ball against top-tier defenses, and Los Angeles has one of the better coached units the Raiders will face. But speaking of the Chargers' defense, it's worth flipping the conversation to what impressed me most from the Raiders' side, their pass protection. Now, I know some fans won't agree, The Patriots did record 4 sacks, but the film tells a different story. This wasn't a case of Colton Miller getting dominated off the edge or Dylan Parham completely collapsing in the middle. More often than not, Geno Smith had time, scanning left to right, coming back to his check down, or even launching the ball 40 yards downfield from a clean pocket. The conditions may have helped a bit. Wet fields make it harder for pass rushers to explode off the line, but still, the blocking held up remarkably well. Of the 4 sacks, only one was truly on an offensive lineman, when rookie Jackson Powers-Johnson missed his assignment. The others were created by well-timed blitzes or defensive line stunts that confused protections, not by a Raider simply getting beaten one-on-one. So while the stat sheet shows 4 sacks, the reality is much more encouraging. This offensive line, long considered a weak spot, actually looked sharp in pass pro. And if they can build on that, it completely changes the ceiling of this offense. The last sack, of course, came on Jackson Powers-Johnson. And yeah, that one's on him. But even with that mistake, I walked away feeling encouraged about this offensive line. Now, looking ahead, the Chargers present a very different kind of challenge. They may not have an elite pass rush group top to bottom, but they do have Khalil Mack, and more importantly, they've got a defensive coordinator in Jesse Minter who thrives on disguising pressure. This is what makes the matchup so fascinating. The Chargers don't rely on superstar names to carry the unit. Instead, they scheme. They'll show blitz, drop out, bring pressure from the opposite side, or run stunts and twists designed to confuse protections. That's where offensive lines separate themselves, not just by winning one-on-one, but by communicating and passing off defenders when the look changes in an instant. For the Raiders, this is the next big test. If DJ Glaze's man peels off inside, he's got to switch and pick up the rusher from Powers-Johnson's side. The center has to slide, the guard has to adjust, and everyone has to stay on the same page. That's the kind of chemistry that takes a line from solid to elite. And with clean weather expected this week, we'll get a clearer picture of just how good this group can really be. One last note before we move on. The Raiders also held a workout this week, bringing in a few names for a look. Defensive backs Isaiah Bolden and Alex Johnson, along with wide receiver Samori Toure, were all in the building. Nothing blockbuster there, but it does raise an eyebrow. For a team that's already brought in plenty of corners, adding even more to the mix suggests the front office still isn't satisfied with its depth in the secondary. Over the past 2 months, the Raiders have loaded up on defensive backs, safeties, corners, you name it. At this point, they've probably signed more players in the secondary than any other position group. And yet, it still feels unsettled. That's the part that's confusing. Against the Patriots, the defense wasn't terrible, but context matters. Drake May is a young quarterback, and in a sloppy, rain-soaked game, there were open windows he just didn't find. But swap May for Justin Herbert in clean conditions? That margin for error disappears. Herbert doesn't miss those reads. Maybe that's why the Raiders are still kicking the tires on guys like Isaiah Bolden or Alex Johnson. Realistically, neither of them changes the ceiling of this defense. At best, they're depth or special teams bodies. If the Raiders truly felt uneasy about their starters, they'd need to swing a trade for a proven playmaker. Now, to be fair, there were flashes from some of the current group. Jeremy Chinn made a couple of impact plays, though he lost some reps too. Isaiah Pola-Mao had the interception, but he gave up ground in coverage. Eric Stokes was targeted 6 times, and 6 catches followed. The one guy who really stood out to me? Kyu Blu Kelly. He played with confidence, stayed sticky in coverage, and looked like someone who belongs in the rotation. That said, I think the bigger picture is starting to take shape. This Raiders defense is built to bend but not break. You'll see completions. You'll see 10 to 15-yard gains. But the philosophy is to tighten up in the red zone, to force field goals instead of touchdowns. And if the Chargers march up and down the field but walk away with 3 instead of 7, suddenly those gaudy yardage totals don't matter nearly as much. That was exactly the formula against New England. The Patriots moved the ball, but when it came down to key moments, the Raiders' defense slammed the door. That's how they won the game. Now, the question is whether they can repeat that same discipline against a far more polished quarterback in Herbert. If they can, then this defense might actually be better than people give it credit for.